She said, if you truly loved me, you'd put my name on the house deed, so I told her to pack her bags. Later, she came back with a lawyer, demanding rights to my house. I never thought 3 words could shatter my world. But when she looked me dead in the eye and said, if you actually loved me, I knew everything I'd built was on the line. I was standing in my kitchen, the one I'd poured sweat and soul into renovating for years, and the air just froze. To truly understand that moment, you need to know something my dad taught me when I was just 19. He was an electrician for over 3 decades, working everything from houses to high-rises. And the one thing he drilled into my head wasn't about wires or circuits. It was about protection. He told me, after a grueling 12-hour shift, that the most important thing a man can do is protect what he builds. Not just with insurance, but with clear boundaries, documentation, and smart decisions. He had this old filing cabinet crammed with permits, receipts, photos of every major job, every license renewal, every piece of paper proving he'd earned what he had. I didn't fully grasp it then, but I do now. My name is Daniel, I'm 34, and I've been an electrician since I was 19. I started as an apprentice making $12 an hour, pulling wire through boiling Atlanta attics, learning from guys who started before I was born. I got my journeyman license at 23, master electrician at 27. By 30, I'd saved enough to start my own contracting business. It wasn't handed to me. It was 6 years of living in a cramped apartment, driving an old pickup, and pouring every extra dollar into my business account. Today, I have 8 guys working for me, including my foreman, Sam, who's been with me from day one. We have steady contracts with 3 property management companies and a reputation that keeps my phone ringing even during slow times. 6 years ago, when I was 28, I bought my house in Atlanta. It was a 3-bedroom ranch, good bones, in a decent neighborhood. Got it for $420,000. I put down $84,000, every penny I had, and spent the next 2 years fixing it up myself. I rewired half the house to code, updated the panel, installed new fixtures, refinished the floors, painted, landscaped. Every single upgrade, every permit, every receipt. I kept it all in a folder, just like Dad taught me. The house appraised last year at $750,000. That's $330,000 in equity I built with my own hands and smart investment. That house wasn't just property, it was proof I knew what I was doing. I met Chloe about 2.5 years ago at a mutual friend's birthday party. She was 29, a pharmaceutical sales rep, drove a leased luxury car, and had this confidence that commanded attention. We hit it off, started dating. For the first 6 months, everything felt normal. She had her own 1-bedroom apartment across town, and we'd split our time between her place and mine. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she started spending more nights at my house. Weekends turned into 3 or 4 nights a week. Then, clothes appeared in my closet, toiletries in my bathroom, food in my fridge. I didn't mind, I liked having her around, and my house was bigger and in a better area. About 8 months in, she mentioned her lease was up, and her landlord was raising the rent to $1,650. She didn't ask directly to move in. She just sighed, saying, I hate throwing money away on rent when I'm basically living at your place anyway. I made the mistake of telling her she could stay while she figured things out. That was the first red flag I missed. She never signed a lease, never paid rent, never contributed to the mortgage or property taxes. Sure, she'd buy groceries sometimes, and she'd pay for dinners out, but there was never a formal arrangement. Looking back, I should have set boundaries then. Either asked her to contribute financially or kept it casual. I didn't, because I genuinely thought we were building something together. Then she met Jessica. Jessica was a friend Chloe made at a networking event for sales reps. From the moment Jessica entered the picture, things shifted. Jessica had opinions about everyone's relationships. Always talking about what her boyfriend did, what her friends' boyfriends should be doing, what expectations were reasonable. Chloe started coming home from lunches with Jessica, casually dropping comments like, Jessica's boyfriend just added her to his condo title, he wanted her to feel secure. Or, did you know in some states, if you live together long enough, you're basically entitled to half of everything? I'd laugh it off or change the subject, but the comments kept coming. She even started sending me articles about cohabitation rights, about sharing assets, about what it means to be a true partner. I'd read them, nod, and move on, thinking she was just thinking out loud. But then, about 4 months ago, one night after I'd made grilled chicken and vegetables, she brought it up directly. "I've been thinking," she said. "We've been together for over 2 years now. I live here. We're building a life together, and it feels weird that this house is only in your name." I put my fork down. "What do you mean?" She said, "I think you should add me to the deed. Make me a co-owner so it actually feels like our home, not just your house that I'm staying in." I stayed calm, which I'm still proud of. I explained it logically. I bought this house 6 years ago, for years before we even met, with my own money I'd saved for years. I explained the sweat equity, that I'd done most of the renovations myself, that the increase in value was because of my work, my investment. I told her I cared about her, loved having her here, but adding her to the deed would mean giving her legal ownership of an asset she hadn't contributed to, and that didn't make sense to me. She didn't yell, but her face changed, it went cold. "So, you're saying you don't see a future with me?" she asked. I told her that wasn't it at all, I was just being realistic about property and finances. That's when she hit me with the line I'll never forget. She leaned back, crossed her arms, and said, "If you actually loved me, you'd add my name to the $750,000 house deed." The way she said it, with that entitled tone, like my hard work was somehow conditional on proving my feelings, made something click in my brain. I looked at her and realized this wasn't about love. This was about control and ownership of something she hadn't earned. I told her, no, I wasn't adding her to the deed. And if that's a problem, we need to talk about what this relationship actually is. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and said, "I need to think about whether I want a future with someone who doesn't treat me like an equal partner," and walked out. She didn't come back that night. Didn't answer my texts. I sat in my house wondering if I'd just dodged a bullet or lost someone I cared about. Chloe came back 3 days later like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She didn't apologize, didn't explain where she'd been. Just walked in with her key, unpacked her overnight bag, and started acting like we were roommates, not a couple. The warmth was gone, replaced by this cold, transactional energy that made my own home feel uncomfortable. She stopped cooking, stopped asking about my day, stopped doing any of the little things that made it feel like we were building something together. I'd come home after a 10-hour day running wire through a commercial building in downtown Atlanta, and she'd be on the couch scrolling her phone, wouldn't even look up. I'd ask if she wanted to grab dinner, and she'd say, "I already ate," in this clipped tone that made it clear she wasn't interested in spending time with me. The worst part was how she started weaponizing the house itself. She'd make comments like, "I'm just staying in your house, so I guess I should act like a guest." Or, "It's your property, you make the rules," with this passive-aggressive edge clearly meant to make me feel guilty. I'd ignore it, focus on work, try to give her space to process whatever she was dealing with. But it became obvious pretty quickly that this wasn't about processing. This was about punishment. She was punishing me for not giving her what she wanted. And I started wondering if I even knew who this person was. About 2 weeks after she came back, I started noticing she was texting more than usual. She'd be smiling at her phone, typing long messages, and when I'd walk into the room, she'd tilt the screen away or put it face down. I'm not the jealous type, never have been, but something felt off. She started going out more, saying she had work dinners or was meeting Jessica, coming home at 10 or 11 at night smelling like wine and making excuses about traffic or long meetings. I didn't confront her because I didn't have proof of anything. And honestly, part of me thought maybe she was just creating distance because we were going through a rough patch. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was supposed to be at a job site in North Atlanta until 6, but the project got delayed because the building inspector didn't show. Sam told the crew to pack it up early. I got home around 3:30, unusual for me. I immediately noticed Chloe's car in the driveway, also weird, because she was supposed to be working. I walked up to the front door, unlocked it quietly, not trying to sneak, just didn't think to announce myself. The moment I stepped inside, I heard voices coming from upstairs, from my bedroom. One was definitely male. I stood in the entryway for maybe 5 seconds, just processing what I was hearing. Then I walked upstairs. I didn't run, didn't yell. Just walked slowly while my brain tried to catch up. I pushed open the bedroom door, my bedroom door, in the house I'd bought with my own money. And there she was, in my bed, with some guy I'd never seen before. They both froze. She screamed. He scrambled for his clothes. I just stood there feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. The guy grabbed his pants and shirt, practically ran past me down the stairs. Didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. Just bolted out the front door like the house was on fire. Chloe pulled the sheet up around herself. I waited for her to say something, anything that made sense. But instead, she went on the offensive. Maybe if you treated me like an actual partner instead of a tenant, I wouldn't have to look for affection somewhere else. I swear, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her to get out. And she had the nerve to laugh, actually laugh, and say, "This is my home too. You can't just kick me out." I walked over to the closet, pulled out her suitcase, threw it on the bed, and told her she had 30 minutes to pack whatever she could carry because I was changing the locks that night. She tried the guilt trip first, saying I was overreacting, that it didn't mean anything, that she'd made a mistake because she felt insecure. When that didn't work, she switched to anger, yelling that she had rights, that she'd been living here for over a year, that I couldn't just throw her out without notice. I stayed calm, which seemed to make her even angrier, and I explained very clearly that she'd never signed a lease, never paid rent, never contributed to the mortgage or property taxes. Legally, she was a guest in my home, not a tenant. She screamed she'd call the police. I told her to go ahead, because I had nothing to hide. She didn't call anyone. Instead, she packed 2 suitcases, the whole time muttering about how I was controlling and cold, and that she should have known better than to waste 2 years with someone like me. I didn't engage, didn't argue. Just watched her pack and waited by the door. Before she left, she turned around and said, "You haven't heard the last of this. I have rights to this house whether you like it or not," and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The moment she was gone, I called my buddy Josh, a contractor I've worked with for years. I told him everything. He came over within an hour with a new deadbolt and handle set, and we changed every lock on every door. I took photos of the house, documented that all her belongings were gone except for a few random items she'd left behind, which I put in a box by the garage. I texted her that her remaining stuff was available for pickup and that she needed to arrange a time with me to get it. No random showing up. She didn't respond. For about 2 weeks, I thought that was the end of it. That she'd moved on and I could start rebuilding my life. Then I got a letter in the mail from a law office downtown, one of those thick envelopes with a firm's name embossed on the return address. I opened it and read the first line, which said Chloe was claiming she had an ownership interest in my property due to our cohabitation and her contributions to the household. I read it 3 times because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was actually trying to claim part of my house, the house I'd bought 4 years before I even met her, the house I'd renovated with my own hands and money. I immediately called the lawyer my dad used for his business stuff, a guy named Benjamin who'd been practicing real estate and contract law for 25 years. I sent him the letter, all my documentation about the house purchase, renovation receipts, permits, photos, everything. He reviewed it all and called me back the next day. He told me not to worry, that I was in a very strong position, that Georgia doesn't recognize common law marriage, and that Chloe's claim had almost no legal basis. He said she'd have to prove she contributed financially to the property or that we had some kind of explicit agreement about ownership. Since she couldn't prove either of those things, her case was essentially dead in the water. But he also warned me that she could still drag this out, file a nuisance lawsuit, and cost me time and money, even if she had no real chance of winning. I authorized him to respond to her lawyer, and he sent back a letter that basically said, "Bring it on. We have all the documentation, and you're wasting everyone's time." I figured that would be the end of it, that her lawyer would see the reality and advise her to drop it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, Benjamin called me and said, she's filing a civil suit. She's asking for $50,000 as compensation for her contributions to the household and emotional damages. I felt my blood pressure spike for the first time in this whole mess. The civil suit took 4 months to wind its way through the system, 4 months of paperwork, depositions, and stress I didn't need while trying to run a business. Benjamin kept reassuring me that we had an airtight case. But the anxiety of having someone ready to take what you've built, even when you know they're wrong, that eats at you in ways I wasn't prepared for. Chloe's lawyer was clearly working on contingency, probably promised a cut if they won, and they were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. They claimed she contributed to household expenses, which was partially true in the sense that she bought groceries sometimes, but they couldn't provide receipts or bank statements showing any significant financial contribution. They claimed she'd done unpaid domestic labor that increased the property value, which was absurd because I'd done all the actual renovation work myself and had the permits to prove it. They even tried to argue that our relationship constituted a domestic partnership under state law. But Benjamin shot that down immediately because Georgia requires explicit registration for domestic partnerships, and we'd never filed anything. The whole thing felt like watching someone try to build a house without a foundation, just stacking lies and half-truths and hoping it wouldn't collapse. The court date finally came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I showed up in a suit with Benjamin, carrying a cardboard file box full of documentation that we probably didn't even need, but brought anyway, just to make a point. Chloe was there with her lawyer, wearing a black dress like she was going to a funeral, and she wouldn't even look at me. The hearing lasted maybe 45 minutes. Benjamin presented our evidence, the purchase documents showing I'd bought the house 4 years before we met, the renovation receipts all in my name, the mortgage statements showing I'd been the sole payer for 6 years, the lack of any lease or cohabitation agreement, the photographs timestamped before and after renovations. Chloe's lawyer tried to argue emotional investment and contribution to household management, but the judge cut him off halfway through and said, "Counselor, I've reviewed the filings, and I don't see any legal basis for your client's claim to property ownership or compensation." The judge dismissed the case right there. Didn't even need to deliberate. And then came the part that actually felt like justice. Benjamin had filed a motion for me to recover legal fees since the suit was frivolous. And the judge agreed. Chloe was ordered to pay $4,500 to cover my attorney costs. The look on her face when the judge announced that was something I'll never forget. Just pure shock that her plan had backfired that badly. Walking out of that courthouse felt like stepping out of a fog I'd been living in for months. Benjamin shook my hand, told me to focus on moving forward, and said if she tried anything else to call him immediately. I went back to work that afternoon, showed up at a job site where we were installing a new electrical panel for a small office building, and just threw myself into the physical work because I needed to feel normal again. But Chloe wasn't done trying to control the narrative. Within a week of the court ruling, she started posting on social media about how she'd been used and discarded, how she'd invested years into a relationship with someone who saw her as disposable, how she'd learned that some people only care about money and property. She never mentioned the lawsuit, never mentioned the incident, just played the victim to anyone who'd listen. I didn't respond at first because I figured people who knew me would know the truth. But then friends started sending me screenshots of her posts, and I realized she was doing actual damage to my reputation. So, I made one post, just one, laying out the facts in the most neutral way possible. I explained that I'd bought my house years before. To Met, that she'd lived there without contributing to the mortgage or ownership, that the relationship ended when I discovered infidelity, and that she'd filed a frivolous lawsuit that was dismissed by a judge, with her being ordered to pay my legal fees. I didn't editorialize, didn't call her names, just stated the timeline and the facts. The response was overwhelming. People I hadn't talked to in years reached out to say they'd suspected she was manipulating the story. Mutual friends apologized for believing her version, and her whole victim narrative fell apart within 48 hours. The karma didn't stop there. Through mutual connections, I found out more about the guy I caught her with. His name was Kevin. He worked with Chloe at the same pharmaceutical company, and it turned out he was married. His wife somehow found out about the affair, I'm guessing through someone at their workplace, and she filed for divorce within a month of everything going down. So Chloe's little escape plan had blown up in spectacular fashion because Kevin wasn't leaving his wife for her, he was getting divorced because of her. I also heard that Chloe had to move back in with her parents after the lawsuit because she'd been spending money she didn't have on lawyers and lifestyle expenses. And the $4,500 judgment definitely didn't help her financial situation. Jessica, her friend who'd encouraged all the entitlement in the first place, apparently distanced herself once the lawsuit failed because she didn't want to be associated with someone who'd publicly lost that badly. I didn't take pleasure in any of that, exactly, but I won't lie and say it didn't feel like the universe was correcting itself. Meanwhile, my business kept growing because the drama hadn't touched my professional reputation at all. I landed 2 major contracts in December, one for a new apartment complex and another for a retail renovation, hired a 9th employee, and my accountant told me I'd had the best year financially since starting the company. The house felt peaceful again, like the energy had shifted back to something calm and positive. About 6 months after everything settled, I met Brooke at a Chamber of Commerce networking event that I normally wouldn't have gone to, but Josh dragged me along. She was a civil engineer, owned her own consulting firm, and we got talking about the challenges of running a small business in a competitive market. She mentioned she bought her own condo 3 years ago and had just finished paying off the renovation costs, and something about the way she talked about property ownership with pride, but not entitlement, made me pay attention. We exchanged numbers, started getting coffee, and the difference between her and Chloe was like night and day. Brooke never asked about my house, never hinted that she expected access to my assets, never played games or tried to manipulate me into proving my feelings with financial gestures. When I eventually told her the whole story about Chloe, she just shook her head and said, "Some people see relationships as partnerships, and some see them as opportunities. You just have to know which one you're dealing with." One night, about 3 months into dating Brooke, I was having dinner with my dad and I told him everything that had happened, the whole saga from start to finish. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "Protecting your assets doesn't mean protecting yourself from happiness. It just means being smart about who you let into your life." And I realized that was the lesson I needed to learn. I'm still living in my house, the house I built, and it's still just in my name. But now it feels like a foundation for something real, instead of a target for someone else's greed. Some nights I sit on the back deck I renovated 2 years ago, looking at the yard I landscaped, and I think about how close I came to losing it all to someone who never valued what it took to build it. The quiet is nice, the peace is better, and knowing I made the right call every step of the way, that's worth more than any relationship built on manipulation could ever be. What would you have done in my situation?